Hello, and welcome to Cybersecurity Today. I'm Jim Wiggins, your host. In case you haven't seen our show before, let me spend a little bit of time and tell you about it. So, what is Cybersecurity Today? Well, it is a show dedicated to tackling the subject of computer security in an exciting and thought-provoking manner. Cybersecurity Today is a 30-minute program that uses a talk show newscast format to discuss themes, topics, and current events in the cybersecurity space. Our goal with this show is to demystify the complexity and the lack of clarity that is sometimes found inside of the cyber domain. You may have heard of the term cybersecurity, and in case you don't know what that means, we're going to do our best so that you can better understand it. For those viewers who are current practitioners, this show will provide guidance and current ideas from cybersecurity subject matter experts on the direction of the cybersecurity industry. We aim to provide information to a full spectrum of viewers, from novices to experts and everywhere in between. Okay. So let's talk about the format of the show. Today's show is going to be broken into two segments. We will have our first segment called Cyber Bites. This first segment covers several events that are happening today in the cybersecurity industry. Some of these events you might not have even heard about. Then, in our second segment, we're going to have Mr. Leo Dregier, who is a cyber educator, mentor, and coach coming on to the show to discuss career guidance for new and existing cybersecurity professionals. We're planning to talk about a full spectrum of areas related to how to get into cyber. For example, are hard technical skills necessary? Or can one solely focus on soft skills such as communication, problem solving, critical thinking, etc.? Do you need to have a degree? How about certifications? I think you'll enjoy this segment as it will cover several important ideas of both developing and/or refining options for career progression. I'm looking forward to talking with Leo about his thoughts on how one can navigate the challenge found of career development with being a cybersecurity professional in the 21st century. Okay, so let's go ahead and move into our first segment, the Cyber Bite segment. In current news, the Enduring Security Framework, sometimes called the ESF, which is comprised of experts from the US government and private sector, recently released the Securing the Software Supply Chain Recommended Practices for Suppliers Guidebook. This guidance has been established to serve as a collection of suggested practices for developers, suppliers, and custom stakeholders to help ensure a more secure software supply chain. This guidance is organized into a three-part series. Part one of the series focuses on software developers. Part two focuses on software suppliers. And part three focuses on software customers. Recent cyber attacks, such as those executed against SolarWinds and its customers, and exploits that take advantage of vulnerabilities such as the Log4j, highlighted weaknesses within the supply chain environment, an issue which spans both commercial and open source software and impacts both private and government enterprises. This guidance that we're talking about can be downloaded from the CISA website at www.cisa.gov. In other news, OpenSSL was recently hit with two high-end security vulnerabilities. Now, OpenSSL is a software library for applications that secure communications over computer network, preventing things like eavesdropping, and also the need to identify parties at each respective end. It's widely used on the internet, including the majority of web, or what we refer to as HTTPS websites. The software weaknesses that were discovered were assigned the following CVE numbers: CVE-2022-3786 and CVE-2022-3602. Both deal with buffer overflow problems in an X.509 email address verification. The CVE 2022-3786 can lead to the possibility of a denial of service attack, while the other CVE, the 2022-3602, can result in an attack by remote code execution. The OpenSSL project that manages the OpenSSL software has indicated on its website that there have not been and are not any current exploits as of today occurring on the internet, but the group managing the OpenSSL source code released OpenSSL 3.0.7 to address the documented weaknesses. The group recommends anyone using OpenSSL 3.0.0 up to version 3.0.6 should upgrade to the 3.0.7 as soon as possible. Prior versions of the OpenSSL 3.0.0 are not impacted. Also, keep in mind that most end users are probably not impacted, but custom and commercial software products that use the OpenSSL software should investigate whether they are at risk and need to update to version 3.0.7 to address these vulnerabilities. A third news article is that CISA has released 2 fact sheets to highlight threats against accounts and systems using certain forms of what's referred to as multi-factor authentication, or MFA. CISA strongly urges all organizations to implement phishing-resistant MFA to protect against phishing and other known cyber threats. If an organization using mobile push notification-based MFA is unable to implement phishing-resistant MFA, CISA recommends using number matching to mitigate MFA fatigue. Although number matching is not as strong as phishing-resistant MFA, it is one of the best interim mitigations for organizations who may not immediately be able to implement phishing-based resistant MFA. CISA recommends users and organizations see the CISA fact sheets implementing phishing-resistant MFA and implementing number matching in the MFA applications. Both of these can be found at the CISA.gov website /MFA for more information. It also includes infographics of the hierarchy of the MFA options. In another news article, a Department of Justice Financial Crimes Enforcement Network reports that Russian-related ransom variants were responsible for the majority of ransomware activities in the second half of 2021. The report mentioned of the 793 ransomware-related incidents reported that occurred between July of 2021 and December 31st of 2021, 75% or 594 had a nexus to Russia, its proxies, or persons acting on behalf of Russian entities. The report also noted Russia-related ransomware variants accounted for 69% of ransomware incident value, 75% of ransomware-related incidents, and 58% of unique ransomware variants reported for the incidents in the review period. All the top 5 highest grossing ransomware variants in this period are connected to Russian cyber actors. The report that's mentioned here can be downloaded from the U.S. Department of the Treasury Financial Crimes Enforcement Network at www.fincen.gov. Those are the headlines that are making news. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with our guest, Mr. Leo Dregier, to talk about cyber career guidance. And he ultimately teaches and mentors others for a living. And we want to talk about options on how you might become a cybersecurity professional. So we'll look forward to seeing you back here in just a few minutes.
What about my privacy?
It's protected.
And the music I listen to. Protected.
What about how I wear my hair?
And the things I say and write?
The Constitution protects your rights.
It isn't an old, fading piece of paper.
It's a living document.
The Constitution says there are 3 branches of government.
So we're kind of like the 4th branch of government.
We are the future of America.
Find out how you could become part of Constitution Day.
For me.
For all.
For real.
Constitution Day is every day.
Welcome back to Cybersecurity Today. Have you heard that there's an abundance of jobs in the cybersecurity market that are currently going unfilled? Some of this demand stems from the ubiquitous nature of information technology that exists in our society. With all this technology we navigate through and around, it means that there's a huge demand for protecting and defending all the information that's found on this information technology. But how does one get into cybersecurity? Is it simply a function of taking a class? Or does it require a degree from an accredited institution? To talk about some of these challenges, we've asked an individual who is an accomplished cyber mentor, educator, and coach to come into the show and discuss these issues. I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Leo Dregier. Leo, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on, Jim.
So Leo, can you give our audience a little bit of background in terms of who you are and ultimately how you've come to help other individuals through mentorship and through coaching in terms of cyber?
Yeah, it started when I was making the transition by putting myself through college. I had to use certifications, more the training side, to solve an immediate problem. So I ended up getting Microsoft certified and then Cisco certified. And I spent a lot of the time like in an actual training center. So that training center ended up hiring me because I just worked on the equipment all day long. And it got to the point where the instructors would lean on me and they're like, do you know the answer to this? And so like, hey, you ever thought about teaching it? So that led on to a trajectory of teaching. And teaching is an interesting thing because you end up with groups of people. You teach a manager class and you're just surrounded and immersed in management. You teach an engineering class, you're just immersed in engineering. Then you try to teach the skill of analysts. So from that unique vantage point, you get to look across the spectrum and you get to see people that are naturally designed for that space, but you also get to see the people that stand out.
So Leo, I'm curious, cyber is kind of an abstract concept to a lot of people. And so when they hear it on TV or they read about it in the press, how does one basically identify with what constitutes being a cybersecurity professional? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think looking at it through the lens of hacking is helpful. I often define hacking as like a box, and you have to learn to think outside of the box. In order to do that, you have to define what your box is. In the sense of careers, what happens is an employer needs people to perform products and services, then there's a natural functionality to that. The cybersecurity professional looks at that process and goes, well, how can we deviate from it? How can we manipulate it? How can we make it work to our advantage? So then the cybersecurity professional is really the balancing of that, of like, what do we want the employees to do versus what are they not allowed to do, and then setting the guardrails for that through policy, through technical, through operational day-to-day.
And so I guess then their job is to then protect information for the organization, right, or assets?
It's ultimately about informational assets these days. I mean, we still have the physical world, but in today's age, this is like information warfare. This is it's an information problem, and it's going to have an informational solution.
So the cybersecurity professional then is really tasked with protecting organizational data, organizational information. What kind of information would they be tasked with protecting?
Well, you could look at it through just regular incidents that a company has to go through. I mean, they have to detect them, they have to contain them, eradicate them. But then there's also the non-incident oriented stuff. You have compliance, you have operational policy, standards, procedures, baselines, guidelines, and that's just a whole different side of it. So both of those worlds ultimately merge, right? The defend element of that, but also just the operational control of that.
So, given your background and having taught for many years, I know you've been on podium for over 20 years in some capacity, teaching and educating. What do you provide? I'm sure you get students come up all the time and they say, hey, how do I get into cyber? Where do you kind of lend them? Do you tell them you need to take a certification, or do you need to get educated in terms of a degree? What kind of recommendations do you make?
Yeah, there's the path of technical certification versus degree, but for me it was just born out of necessity. I meet a lot of people that want to go to college, and after college they want to go get an internship, and my immediate instincts are like, that's way too late. If I wanted to do an internship on something, then I would do that to just see if that's even a career for me. So for my definition of intern, it would be more, do I want to do the risk management framework and more of the paperwork side of things, or do I want to do more of the engineering side of things?
So it sounds like, based on what you just described, you're kind of getting people to think about almost two possible paths, so kind of a technical path and more of a kind of a business or a managerial type of path. Is that a good way to maybe think about it in terms of career development or career progression?
Yeah, but also internship versus apprenticeship, right? So like in an apprenticeship mindset, it's like, hey, this person has the skill set that I need. I want to go learn that from them because they know it inside and out. It's, you know, the old days of a printing press, right? You had to become an apprentice and you just dedicate yourself to that task until you learn everything about it. Where an internship, I think, is just more of, do I even want to make this decision to go into this space or that space?
So if somebody wanted to go into one of those two, what I'll call pipelines or kind of focus areas, I'm just going to keep this real simple, right? Technical or kind of managerial, you know, they got a lot of options. You mentioned certifications, there are degree programs. Let's talk a little bit about traditional education for a second. What role do you think colleges play in educating cybersecurity professionals?
Well, both colleges and the training vendors have an absolute critical, pivotal role. The traditional educational side, that's going to be your long term. And I think you can go as far and deep in that is into your application. Like a bachelor's degree gets you to a certain level. Do you want to specialize in something? Okay, master's. But a PhD really becomes questionable. Now, if you want an academic path, then okay, yeah, that's the next step. But for your average engineer, that's just way overkill. They don't need to tap into that advanced skill set. It's not really going to help in the job market, you know, as a tactician. But in the educational element, it would be appropriate and par for the course.
Do you think that a cybersecurity professional is well served by having a degree in some capacity? I mean, I assume it's going to help them think, but do they need to have a degree specifically in cyber, or can it be in something other than cyber?
The industry has answered that question for us. You know, over the previous 20 years, you know, Microsoft and Cisco, you had all walks of life going to into a space, and all those people were pulled from, and they had degrees from other places. So, you know, I look at a degree as a standard. You have to meet a standard, but after that, it's, you know, it's a real hodgepodge mix between like what happens in the workplace versus, hey, where'd you go to school and what was your degree in? That seems to melt away real quick.
Got it. So the cyber professional doesn't necessarily need to have a degree specializing in cyber. In fact, it might be well suited if they don't. Like if they have a business degree, right, then maybe they can understand the business imperatives that their organizations face. Got it. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about certifications. Are they necessary in your estimation? Do you think that the cyber professionals need to seriously consider, if you want to be a cyber professional, to pursue them?
Well, at cybersecurity, it's not just a need, it's a requirement. You know, organizations are requiring it these days. They want you to be for certain roles, have certain certifications, and they're matching certifications to the job role.
Got it. So, so what kind of certifications would you recommend or see that people pursue? Are they vendor specific? Are they vendor agnostic? I'm sure there's kind of a couple different options that are available.
Yeah, that's a tricky one. You really got to push the envelope to see like what the right answer is. So for example, the cloud certification, CCSP, it's great in terms of an agnostic baseline of the cloud, but as soon as you talk to the recruiters, they want the vendor certs, and they're not really going to talk to you specifically because that's what those recruiters are looking for. So if you want to break the mold, you know, you have to do the vendor stuff too.
So I guess a lot of it's going to be dictated or driven by what the human resource department in a given company is going to be looking for.
Yeah,
right,
I mean, that's a process. We're ultimately going through that process, whether it's through the recruiters and the job candidate or what is the recruiter being told by the company. A lot of times the companies don't even know what they have to solve, the problem that they have to solve. They're just like, hey, we have a compliance issue. We need people to solve this problem. I think these certifications, they're going to be what we need, and maybe some degrees in there. So they post something for the jobs, and then like 24 hours later, there's 200-300 people applying for that. And it's like, then it's a sorting and stacking issue. So when we talk about certifications and degrees, you have to get through that process or not go through that process at all, find another way. And that's where your networking, your relationships come in, you know, just talking, hey, to your friends, could I intern here? Or do you have a job there? You have to look at it through an opportunistic lens to go, okay, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I know how it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen the way most people think it's going to happen, which is, hey, I'm just going to go to college, get a job. I'm just going to go get this certification, get a job. There's a lot of variables and a lot of dynamics that can change between you go from, you know, I want to do something and, you know, now I'm hired to do so.
So you brought up this idea of vendor-specific certifications, and I'm curious, do you think that there's some value in maybe being more vendor agnostic, at least initially, if you're trying to get into cyber? Because, if company A only uses vendor A, you're kind of limited, right? Versus if company B uses a different vendor. But if you're using you use the cloud as an example, right? If you pursue and obtain a vendor agnostic certification, do you think that helps the candidate be a little bit more marketable in terms of their job search?
I don't know. That's another difficult question to answer. The agnostic, non-vendor specific, that's just here to stay. This is foundational stuff. And I tend to look at that through the cybersecurity principles. So you're looking at confidentiality, integrity, availability, authentication versus authorization, physical versus administrative. Those are like the building blocks. These are your ingredients that you're baking with. When you get to the vendor side of it, now let's bake a cake, or are we baking muffins? And it has a whole different approach to it in that sense. It's like very tactical. Understood.
Let's talk now a little bit about job options and work roles. So what type of jobs do you think cyber professionals usually go after? Are there generalist positions, or are they slotted into very specific role-oriented functions?
Yeah, they're definitely job-oriented in the sense of like analyst, designer, operator, program manager, even director. So that's very rigid in that sense.
So are there existing jobs that are useful for cybersecurity professionals? For example, I'm thinking about, we talked earlier about, I think you mentioned Microsoft in one of your prior ones. Could an IT professional be a good candidate for somebody that wants to transition into cyber, or does that not really matter? I guess where I'm going with this, does having that foundational IT background lend itself towards favorability of one candidate over another potentially?
I look at this through any sports team lens, right? You have the players on the field, but look at all of the support positions that you have. You can't do it without the fans. You got to have people to feed the fans. You have the cheerleaders. You have the coaches. I mean, there's just so much more than just like the players on the field. But all of it has to be put together to win a game.
Understood. I did want to talk a little bit about cyber competitions. We discussed education in terms of certification and degrees, but there does tend to be these cyber competitions that are starting to impact the cyber education space. I'm curious, how useful do you think that these are in helping build competence around cyber?
I think ultimately you're simulating the experience, right? You get a bunch of professionals from all walks of life, and you're like, hey, solve this problem. One team's going to break in, the other team's going to break out, and you develop soft skills, right? You learn how to communicate, you learn teamwork, all critical in the workplace. But it's a team sport, and it's not one where it's like, hey, one superstar with this particular skill set is going to come in and save the day. It's a team sport. If you want to develop that in the workplace, then these cyber competitions are a way to go. But on the same note, it's just that. It's a cyber competition. There's so many other aspects to cybersecurity that it's not necessarily competition driven.
I guess I was thinking about it from an experiential learning perspective, and ultimately kind of learning by doing in a kind of a non-threatening way. I guess I was in my mind.
It's a simulation.
Yeah, exactly. So there's definitely a place for it from in the learning continuum of cybersecurity professionals.
But make that as real as possible, right? It's not just offense and defense. Make it as real as possible. When we train soldiers for war, we make the simulation as real life as possible. Same thing, same concept. You're just applying it to a corporation's problem or even a military problems.
Got it. Okay, so I did want to ask about something called NICE, the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education. Can you talk a little bit about it and how it's helping kind of develop a taxonomy or framework for education when it comes to cyber?
Yeah, well, it's the merging of two worlds. You have an academic world with teachers and students, and then you have employers and employees in more of a professional setting. So when the government looks at the landscape, they go, wait a second, we need synergy between these two bodies. So something like the NICE framework is built, and it's going to be the bedrock for moving forward.
Got it. All right, well, that's going to do it for today, Leo. Thanks for coming in and talking to our audience about cyber careers and cyber education and all of those different types of things. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So that's going to do it for today's episode. We again want to thank our guest, Mr. Leo Dregier, for coming in and talking to us about career options in cyber and how you might consider pursuing a career in cybersecurity. We hope that you found the information in today's show interesting and that you learned something new about cybersecurity. If you would like to learn more about cybersecurity today and track upcoming episodes, please check out our show's website at cybersecuritytoday.org. You can also reach out to us with questions or comments at our email, which is contact us at cybersecuritytoday.org. Thanks a lot for joining us. We look forward to seeing you at our next broadcast. Have a wonderful day.